this first episode of the Coachcast, as I like to call it. So you're the first guest, and excited to get into it with you today. So we first met at the NSCA regional conference where you were presenting on movement preparation, and I thought you did a great presentation there. So I just wanted to, this is my kind of selfish way of reaching out to you and learning from you as well. So yeah, how about you introduce yourself for the people that maybe haven't heard of you or don't know quite kind of what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So my name is Ivi Casagrande. I'm the strength conditioning coach for Orlando Pride currently. So going to my second season with them, which unfortunately we had to suspend for indeterminate times. Just has been crazy times over here for everybody. But I've started with them last April, which was a little bit after their preseason, and I arrived in the middle of the season, which was kind of crazy, chaotic, but really good learning experience for me. Before that, I was in Michigan as a director of sports performance for a youth athletic training facility for about 2 years, almost 2 years. So, and I'm a per diem network sports scientist with U.S. youth national team. So whenever we're in off season, I go do some camps with the youth national teams, which is a great experience for me to kind of get back to the youth a little bit, which I've always loved and worked with for about 4 years before I came to join Orlando Pride. So it's been quite a journey since then.
Yeah, sounds it. How about we actually start off with the youth training that you do and how that's maybe influenced some of your programming with what you do now with the Orlando Pride.
Yeah, it was really interesting for me because when I started in my master's, I did a bunch of internships and mentorships throughout the summers of my master's, and they're all with elite athletes mostly, because I worked for Exos as an intern, LA Galaxy, and both the academies and the first team. But my exposure as an intern was a lot of elite, which when I finished my master's and I was at Redline, and it was all youth, it was a really eye-opening experience because I was trying to get all the methodology that I learned from Exos to the youth, because we literally started from the ground at Michigan. Like, Redline is a franchise, it's huge all over the US, but we were opening that first franchise in Michigan. So construction, when I got there, we were like literally in the middle of construction, and it was a really cool experience because I could start something and start my own methodology together with Redline and their mission. But it was my way to kind of learn the leadership and get coaches around me that I trusted and develop an internship program there, which was amazing. But it was a huge learning process for me and a trial and error like all the time, because with Axel's methodology that I had a lot from, that I learned a lot from, it's all about this perfecting the basics really well. And the way they do that, it's a really cool way with elite athletes, but I think it's really hard for you to mimic that into the youth, because sometimes if you're not creative, it's going to be really boring for the kids, because it's just like wall drills and like breaking down movement. And if you're telling kids that are like 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds that have so much energy, you have to find a different way to do it. So that was a really eye-opening experience, because I had to change all my methodology and all my, not methodology I'll say, but like all this stuff that I thought it was going to be ingrained in my philosophy. And I changed it because the kids I wouldn't get the buy-in from the kids if it was just like that. So I created a little process where they would come and we would do a dynamic warm-up, and that dynamic warm-up was really important to really get the kids to have a little consistency every day in some part of our training. And then we go through 5 minutes, like movement skills, like the boring part of the stuff, where we actually take the time to slow kids down, which we need to find a way to meet them halfway, because you don't want to slow them down too much, because they want to, they want to express themselves, the movement and creativity. But I think it's really important to still have a big part on that movement part, just because our kids today is like nowadays they're just not playing outside as much, and they're just not, like when I was a kid, I would be outside all the time playing soccer and jumping on trees, and that's already like movement expression and dealing with movement problems and creating solutions your own way, which I was shocked when I saw kids that had, like, some of them were just, they could not never interact with each other. So I think that as a youth coach, you have a really big responsibility of at least 5 minutes, getting the consistency of teaching them how to land, teaching them how to express power through the outside leg. Because most of those kids, they're actually multi-sport, or they are specialized in one sport in a pretty young age. So you see, if you're not doing your job there, because the clubs are definitely, some of them are not doing that, the youth clubs. Like, it's really hard to find clubs that actually have the staff that can do that. And they're not playing outside, so it's kind of like our job to instill that little movement literacy that sometimes they're not getting in PE, because PE in schools are decreasing in a high rate too. So we did that, and then after that boring part is the creativity, right? So how can you link the focus of that session to something that's applicable, and you're actually explaining to them why you're doing it. So if I'm doing a lateral movement kind of day, I'm going to do a competition between 1 and 2 in a mirror drill, and add a bunch of different multi-directional drills within, because now you're adding fun, you're adding competition, and they're completely bought in, and now they know why the value of that 5 boring minutes, why is it applicable to their sport and to what they're doing. So we did a lot of that, and we did a lot of like letting them figure things out, which some kids, when you do that and you give them freedom, they're just like freeze, and they're like, I don't know how to create solutions, I don't know how to be creative, because they're just so busy with social media, they're busy with video games, they're just not used to that. And then you see the kids, they're actually playing outside and having all those experiences, and when you give them a drill and it's like, okay, now it's your time to be creative, create anything that you want with this 3 equipment pieces that I'll give you, like a cone, a ladder, a box. And then they're like, oh my gosh, they are so excited, because now they want to express the creativity, because that's what they do and they're used to it. So it's really easy to find those 2 different kind of youth athletes. And then going forward, when I joined with the professional team, there's a big thing that I realized was, because you think that elite level athletes know everything in terms of movement competency and figuring out ways, but most of them don't. And you kind of have to go back to training the youth. It's like, get back to the basics, be creative with it, because they still need to buy into it. For me, it's like the best way to, if you want to be dealing with elite professional athletes, I think you have to get that youth experience in, because that helps you so much. Not only finding creative ways to get the buy-in from players, because the elite players, they love competition, right? So if you add the fun and competition together, then they're completely bought in. And that's kind of what I learned. I think even if you can find ways to really make it creative for them and applicable in their real world situation and the sport, I think that's a win-win. And if I didn't work with youth before, I would probably not being able to be as creative as I am today to use my warm-up time, which is 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or good days, 20 minutes, to really get everything I need with them. And I think the warm-up is such a big, important time to hammer all those things in. And a lot of coaches complain that they don't have time, but you can do so much during a warm-up instead of just going through the motions. So definitely a learning experience from that.
For sure, yeah. And I mean, I always used to think or say to myself when I was kind of in the infancy of my coaching career, that I wasn't in the entertainment business. And I'd heard 1 or 2 other coaches that I respected had said that as well. But then because I started off, I interned at like the collegiate environment over in the UK, and then went into working a little bit of youth. And to be honest, you almost bypass the entertainment aspect being in that collegiate environment. And I look back now, and it's becoming, even though I'm back in the collegiate environment, you need to understand how to have the kind of, I don't like necessarily love the word fun, but you need to have the fun and the enjoyment factor in the session to get the buy-in. And I think that's the same from being, whether you're working with your under 12s in the academy or whatever it is, through to your collegiate or pro athletes that you're dealing with now. And do you think that's one of the biggest things that you've potentially learned over the years, that by having like a fun or entertainment element within your, and that comes obviously in different forms, like you're talking about the pros love the competition compared to the youth athletes love maybe creating something themselves. Do you think there's a huge carryover from that youth athlete to the pros, and you could almost run the same session to an extent?
Yeah, like 100%. Like my warm-up sessions, like at the end of my warm-up sessions, I always like to get a cognitive drill and a fun drill, and 90% is from all the drills that I coach with my youth team. And I think you got a good point in the collegiate level, especially because when I played in college, it was freaking hell. Like because there's so much pressure, and it's just like back, like it's getting better now, but it's just like running and running and running. I felt like I was a track athlete sometimes, because and there's no like really fun. Sometimes it's just it's crazy, because that can really ruin your college experience. So I think not only that fun, but the connection from the coach and the athlete. I think that's a lot of times is kind of, it's hard to find coaches that can do that, and I think it's the hardest part of coaching. It's really creating that relationship with the athlete so that buy-in can come from it, and interaction and all that stuff. And I think the NCAA, it's hard because there's so many rules like within the system that when I worked with the college system for 2 years before I went to Redline, it was really weird transition when I went to professional, because you're like, am I allowed to talk to them if I'm not in the gym? Like, it's so weird what the NCAA rules like make you feel like you can't do anything. So I don't know. It's just I understand the rules, but I think it's just it kind of puts coaches in kind of like I don't know, how can I develop that relationship and trust, but then at the same time, abide from the.
I know exactly what you mean. When I first moved over here from the UK, and I was taking sessions, and obviously you know about the NCAA regulations and things like that, but you don't know exactly the ins and outs. And it's, as someone from the outside coming in, you're trying to really understand, okay, so what can I do here with the athletes? How long have I actually got? Does that fit into, if you're in an off-season 8-hour block period, you've got to obviously decide, okay, I've maybe got 4 hours of physical prep here, 4 hours for sport practice. Like, what's going on? You've really got to think about how you're going to kind of apply your training and where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So that kind of leads me on a little bit. This year I've had a bit of a focus on, within my own sessions, trying to have my guys and girls, I want them to leave my session. So usually if I'm taking a 10, 15-minute warm-up like you were talking about, my goal was I want them to leave my session smiling. Okay, so I wanted them to come away happy from the session. They'd had a good time. So we might go through our movement prep, and then we might play, like you said, with some sort of game. And they come away from the session with me thinking, oh, we've had a good time, and we want to go back to him. Because I'm sure you've had it yourself, that when coaches send athletes to you, they're coming over being like, oh, it's fitness. It's like, it's always going to be a hard session.
Right.
So I've tried, from my point of view, to change that persona on the athletes and what they're thinking. So my question to you is around that. If you're taking 5, 7, maybe a few more warm-ups per week with your athletes, how are you providing that much variability within all your sessions? You've obviously got different goals for each session in the warm-up, but how are you coming up with these ideas? What are your secrets?
Yeah, it's actually something that terrifies me every day before going to training. It's like it's making sure my warm-ups are not going to be boring for them, which is when you're in preseason, when you have 2 sessions a day, 3 sessions a day, you're like, oh my gosh, we still have 7 months of training. How can I really get that going? But what helped me a lot the last couple of months, and I think that's really, I learned a lot from one of our assistant coaches currently, that he was a former sports scientist. It's understanding the game. I mean, I played at a professional level. I played as a semi-pro, but once you're in that position, sometimes you forget to think about the game demands and stuff like that. And how can you include that in your warm-ups? So I think the biggest thing for me is I've been trying to really be on all the technical staff meetings so I can understand the little things that the staff wants from them in terms of anything like 1v1 situations, how they need to be quicker, how is our style of game going to be, because that can be really helpful to add variability to my warm-up. So and increase the buy-in from the players, because if you include the ball, or if you include anything that it's going to be tied to the game and tied to what they do in the game, then that's a win-win. So what I started doing is, like, I've had that, you always have to have that boring time where you put them on a line, or you create, sometimes I do like circles, they go all in the middle, and that post raiser, right? So the post raiser, you can really add variability. Of course, you can add variability in terms of the mobility that you put in, but it's just that 5 minutes that, unfortunately, sometimes you just have to go through the motions, which is fine. But after that, then I sit down with the coaches and during the week, and I say, okay, what is the focus of that? The technical sessions. Is that change direction? Is that lateral movement? Is that pressing? It's a 10v10, 11v11. Anything like that will give me information of stuff that I want to add to my warm-up on that specific day to really prepare them to what they're going to be doing in training. So a lot of the stuff that I've been trying to do is I do a drill where they still do the movement stuff that I want them to do. So, like, I put a lateral, they have to accelerate, lateral shuffle, go around, which are all of the movements that they need to do in the field, but it's isolated with no ball, because I want them to really ingrain that quick transition from acceleration to deceleration, change direction. And then after that, they can receive a ball after a 10 meters sprint to a touch to a mini goal. That little portion is so important for them, because as soon as you get that ball in, and the coaches are around too, and the warm-up, the quality and the intent goes from here to here. So I think it's really important to work with technical staff to make sure we make that connection, so not only players can buy into what you do, but the coaches can buy into what you do too, and they can really use that time, even if you're any, like, because I know you work with tennis, like if you have tennis balls or stuff like that, the coaches are really hammering down in terms of technicality of the sport. It's going to be huge for coaches, and they maybe give you more time to work on a warm-up, 5 more minutes compared to 10. So it's just that technical, and you don't have to be specific, like really specific with soccer, because then the technical part is with the coaches, but the movements, it's all related to what we do. So, like, if our midfielders are not being able to switch the game from left to right because they physically can do, then that's on us. So how can we help them to get the extra quality in the gym and all that to make that happen? And that can be focused on strength and power. Not only that, maybe joint limitations that can really make them hard to move and smooth move on the field. So I've been taking a lot of pride on really get assessments down in preseason, not only just like strength and power assessments, but also biomechanical assessments, where I use a lot of video analysis to make sure what's going on with them. And I think it's a huge puzzle that we have in front of us, and then it's up to us to kind of get the pieces of the puzzle together. And sometimes you have to think big picture. I have a lot of conversations with Dan Pfaff all the time because he's so big on the video analysis. And when I went to Altus this year and did their coaching program, it was just eye-opening because it's really cool to see how much that can really help you to answer questions. And sometimes we get too busy isolating, like, oh, problem was with the hips, and then we forget something downstream or up the stream that can actually be causing that. And you can find that you don't need to really create a full battery of tests to do that. I started doing is I have an intern. I started filming our gym sessions and to like a frontal side view of the players, and then just playing all over afterwards and kind of just figuring things out. So it's been really helpful for me to kind of and fun process to get those pieces of the puzzle and kind of everything coming together, and you kind of like, okay, that makes sense. So it's
do
really
you find that helps with athlete buy-in as well? Do they like being recorded and things like that, being able to watch themselves back?
Yeah, they love it, and it's been really cool to see that because at that level, like they want that feedback, because a lot of those athletes, they just do everything they can to be the best version of themselves. So we have a lot of players that spend so much time in prehab and like taking care of their bodies, and they appreciate so much to give them the tools to get to that. So like, for example, now in our quarantine, I gave all my hip tightness athletes, which they know who they are, and based on assessments, like I showed them and showed the videos and just kind of like walk them through stuff. So I send them a 14-day mobility challenge from Cali Starrett. Every day I would send them a text with, okay, this is day 1, this is day 2. So that was amazing because they started to realize that in order for you to really move well, there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle. It's not just like hammering hip mobility for 14 days. It's like, it's your ankle, is your adductors might be tight, is your quads might be tight. So it's a really cool process for them to understand that. And it builds that interaction too during those times where, you know, they'd have enough time to work on those things, and they appreciate that. And even with sprints, like when they do sprints in their programs now during quarantine, like I tell them, just send me a video of your sprints, and then I just kind of give them feedback, things that they want to know, and it's really cool because then you're building the interaction, or you're building that buy-in, and they want to know, and they're like, how can I get rid of that? And then I have to explain, like, oh, sometimes because you're at that professional level, we need to be really careful of changing somebody's movement mechanics, and it's I know you created that compensation for how many years. So the way I see it is like, how can I prepare them with the right tools, mobility, strength, all that stuff, to be prepared for the demands of the game and the chaos with that compensation. I'm not trying to change. Sometimes it's hard to change. You can help them, but changing gaits and all that stuff is a really dangerous spot to be in. And it's like, can you build the resiliency around that? So when they're actually going to the high speed of the sports and the high chaos of the sport, they can actually deal with it with that compensation because they're prepared, they're strong, they have the resiliency to deal with it. So that's kind of, it's my education part to them and trying them to, because they're a perfectionist. So they want to like, how can I get the sprint like as perfect as you can? Like, you're not going to think about that when you're sprinting in a soccer field, but how can we help you to create forces more effectively and be powerful and all that, and that extra second that you have in that during that transition from deceleration to acceleration to be quicker than your opponent. That's what I'm trying to get. It's not getting you to be a perfect sprinter, because you're not going to be a soccer player.
You're a soccer player at the end of the day, and that's something that I've always thought. It's like athletes at the end of the day are just the best compensators at movement.
Right.
They've adapted, they've compensated in the best way possible that allows them to perform their sport. Now, if I look at my tennis players, Like they've got certain things that are going to help them. They've got more external rotation, less internal rotation, or whatever it's going to be. And that's just kind of the way it is. They're going to have those asymmetries from limb to limb. And that's something that if we try and change that, then we're potentially going to like limit their performance in other ways. They're going to have a stronger or bigger stance leg on their serve because they land on, well, every time they serve, they land on one leg like 100 times a day or whatever it's going to be. Exactly. And that's thousands of reps per year, and like we just cannot overcome that in the gym. So I know we'll jump back a little bit there. You talked about assessments.
Mm-hmm.
What type of assessments? You mentioned like biomechanical assessments and things like that. How are you kind of like, what assessments are you doing? How are you prioritizing that within your team's training program? Are you individualizing? And then how is that leading into your KPIs and things like that? I know there's kind of a 3-4-fold question there.
As I told you, like it's a lot of the times it's like detecting those movement compensations they're moving, and the video helps a lot. So if I can share my screen, I can give you guys an example.
Sure thing.
Let me know if my screen is being shared.
Yep, I got you.
Okay, so this girl here, Abby, so she works with me at Redline, and she is a volleyball player. Came with a huge she had an ankle problem in the past, but she had a really lower back chronic pain. So when she came in, I just started doing those little things that I could film that could give me some idea of what was going on there. So if you see, and I'm gonna slow this down just so people can see, like when you see her right arm when she goes up and her upper body, she completely shifts and then she's back to it, so, like slowly back to it. So main thing I got from this is like, okay, maybe her lumbar pelvic control is horrible, where she needs that, especially with volleyball. Like that's gonna be something that might be causing that chronic lower back pain. If she's not strong there, she's gonna compensate, and lack of strength. She was not really never really done a lot of strength training before, so we started with the basics. So let me see if I can find the other video, and I'll show you kind of the thought process that I had and kind of what. Let's see if he is going to open here. So lumbar pelvic control is a big one that I started doing with her. And then deceleration abilities, I think it's huge for us to be able to see a lot of the movement compensations during stability, during deceleration. So I just put her barefoot and I just told her like to squat, and then there's like really big collapse of the foot there in just a like resting position. So we started doing foot stability stuff, basic foot stability stuff to create that intrinsic foot strength. So we started from the bottom, went work all the way up. We did lumbar pelvic control. This one is from one of my favorite for lumbar pelvic control. This is from Sam Blanchard, who was a physio from Arsenal. He's at Man City now. But so creating the dissociation to get that lumbar pelvic control. See that pelvis is working really hard. Working on that foot control with simple exercises and make sure they don't collapse. Simple exercises where you're just telling them to own positions and you're slowing them down. And I think as a female athlete, especially when you're going through the growth maturation phase, it's huge for us to really slow them down and get that those things to kind of make them own positions. And then deceleration. So deceleration is, let's see if I can find. There's a deceleration drill that I do. If you slow-mo that drill, let's see if this is the one. So what happens is I've started seeing, like, especially with football players, and this is like a U14 team. So you can see the difference on the right side of the size of the players. Like, you have players that are so much taller and look so much more mature than players that are in the same age, but it's kind of like late developers. And then if you see this guy here, I don't know, can you see my
Yeah,
little
I can
thing?
see you.
Yeah, so Ty, he worked with us for a year, and it's like strength, single leg strength, slowing him down, going to the deceleration positions and owning those positions. The other guys, the other boys, they're like literally just, this was the first training that they had, and they'd never been able to, they're never exposed to really strength training before. So this is a simple drill that I do. Use your arms, good. And then I want you to see Ty when he decelerates here, and how strong of that stable position he gets. And then look at the other ones. Look at this guy here, right here. Look at his movement mechanics when he decelerates, right? Trunk goes one way, foot collapse, then knee gonna collapse. Look at this guy close to Ty too. So I started noticing all those patterns from kids that, look at this guy here. Look at the foot. What happened when he decelerates? So now you're thinking about a controlled environment, right? And then when you go and think about soccer and all those different sports and the chaos that's added to it, and you see kids doing that in a controlled environment, and then they go play soccer in a really high speed chaos situation, then they're not able to control their bodies and are able, and you see that ACL injuries and all that stuff. So not only for I think it's a big thing for us to start teaching youth how to move better, and then that movement literacy comes from that time when they are young, and you're already instilling things with, like, it's just that motor pattern that you're instilling every single day. When they go on the field, it's like automatically they have the strength to deal with the demands. Not only that, but they have the motor control to do those actions. So, and it's really, you can really see, and that's like Ty. It's like the way he decelerates is like his body knows what, when it needs to decelerate. It's in a stable position, all good to go. So it's not that this is gonna prevent all injuries, but it's gonna put them in better positions and better ways to kind of deal with the demands of the game. And that's huge, especially when they're going through their 14, 15-year-old. Like with females, they're going to mature way earlier. So they're probably going to do it during when they're 11, 12 years old. And that's the time to really start hammering strength and start hammering motor control, because when menarche comes and have the periods and like the menstruation, then it's like you have to give them strength for their joints and the lumbar pelvic control, all those things that, because of the female anatomy, that's going to get them more predisposed for injuries as ACL. So how can we as coaches start them young, doing strength in those kind of training, like learning how to decelerate, how to control their bodies and stuff. So, and that's where, when I talk to you about in the beginning, is like, you need to know how to slow kids down and how to speed them up, right? Because you can't say that you just have to slow them down, because they need to express movement, they need to play, they need to do that. But once it comes that phase where the growth maturation comes, they get awkward. You see parents like, oh, my kid is not doing well in his physical tests, and he's not really, his running technique is horrible on the field and stuff like that. They don't understand that. And a lot of the time we have to educate parents and tell them, there's a lot of changes, physiological changes going on in your kid's body. So how can we slow them down now? Because now they need to slow down, to be slowing down, because they need to get that motor control, which a lot of kids don't, especially when they're going through the growth spurt, because they don't know how to control their bodies. Like the legs are probably growing faster than their trunk or stuff like that. So those things are things that we as coaches need to affect and need to take control of, and I think it's extremely important.
Yeah, I like that little saying. It's almost, you got to slow them down to speed them up. You got to choose the right time and the right opportune moment to do that. And I think the examples that you used there, where obviously the athlete that you've been working with, he had so much better motor control, his deceleration, acceleration patterns, just because he's done it, and it's that repetition, and compared to the other athletes. And then that obviously makes my job easier if they come to work with me in the collegiate setting, and then if I pass them on to you to work in the pro setting, that's going to make everyone's job. Then you're obviously working with an advanced athlete in terms of his movement, compared to you could get someone very much kind of at the elementary scale at times, where they haven't really been taught how to move, even in the pro game. So you've got such a variety of skills and different levels within the athletes you've got. So just moving on a little bit, I know you talked about like training the female athlete there a little bit and the differences. Let's get into that a little bit, if that's okay, because obviously, and I think some coaches get away from this a little bit. Like, training the female athlete is not like training a male athlete. They're not just little men, and I think it's important for coaches to understand that. And I think the more female coaches we get into this profession, the better it's going to be from everyone, because like we're constantly learning. Males are constantly learning from females, and vice versa. And I think the female profession is just growing, and it's got so much to give. So could you get into that a little bit on how you maybe train your female athletes compared to how you'd maybe train a male soccer player?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, and I say that, but I still build the connections as much with a male athlete, right? But I think female athletes, they crave that interaction. They crave a little bit more that understanding of the coach, of what they're normally dealing with. And it's cool, like because I played, and I have the same problems that they go through in once a month, so we can really kind of joke around about it. But I think it's harder for a male coach to do that. But I don't think it should be a taboo, right? Because it's such a menstrual cycles are such an important piece of the puzzle, and it's not the piece of the puzzle like everybody thinks is like, oh my gosh, it's the only way. Like, if you're training female athletes, you just need to monitor. And I think in the practical world, it's really hard to really use that because there's a lot of research on the menstrual cycle, and at specific phases there's more injuries and all that. If you're like, for example, I'm the only I have a nutritionist, a dietitian, and I have an athletic trainer. But I do all the strength conditioning programs. I do the return to play protocols. I do the data analysis. I do the GPS report. So for me to really use the menstrual cycle data to really individualize stuff, it's impossible. Because for me, there's other priorities, such as, getting those assessments. How can I create a culture in the team that those players are going to come 30 minutes before a training and spend time hammering those things that they need to be hammering. But now I think it is really important information to know your athletes, and that menstrual cycle piece, it's really important to know your athletes, because one of them can deal with it fine, can be okay with it. Some of them have really problems with it in terms of terrible fatigue. Like, they're not able to, like, some in the past said that it screws up their balance, like in the weight room when we do like single leg stuff. They're like, whew, when I'm on my period, like, definitely can feel the difference. So knowing that, I can tell my coach, and I can talk to my athlete in ways that I can, not telling them, okay, you're having terrible menstrual period symptoms, then I'm going to give you a day off. It's not that. It's just, how can I manage and affect that in a good way so you can still perform in a good way, right? So maybe I do a bilateral hamstring instead of single leg if that player really struggles with balance, if she really thinks that balance is something affected by the menstrual cycle. If the fatigue is huge, the coach needs to know, because they're gonna know, like, they're gonna think, well, why is this player like slow today? Is just like not the reaction times is slower and everything's kind of off. Then
Is
if the
that
coach
something
has
you're
that,
tracking? Are you tracking that kind of where they are in their cycle potentially? Are they feeding that back to you, or obviously you're tracking the things as well?
sometimes it just comes from conversations because we build such a good relationship between me and them, and that they are like, like I'm not feeling it, and they don't even need to tell me. Well, like I'm feeling it, so I know exactly what they mean. Um, so, but we also have we use a readiness questionnaire where they can put, it shows us if they're in the end of the cycle or the beginning of the cycle, which gives us good information on that, and then we can just follow up with them and say, if there's anything that I can do for you to kind of, and sometimes I direct them to our nutritionist and say, okay, talk to Ricky. She's going to tell you specific what foods will be better for you during this. For injured players, there's foods that it's going to really help you with an inflammatory response and all that stuff. So how can we affect those little things that can really help them to perform? It's not like you're changing your entire training based on like individualized, because I can't do that. I can only do too much with like being myself there, like but it's it's the pieces of the puzzle that I talked to you about. Like, it's how can we can create that puzzle where you can affect them in different ways, and provide support in each and every way, and where they're now like they are comfortable coming to me and say like, okay, what can I do, because I'm like feeling like shit, what can I do to change this exercise, or so it's just another piece to really help them along the way. And again, the biggest thing with female athletes that I've noticed too is, and again, it's hard to say that it's only female athletes, because a lot of football players have the same problems, like the male too. The lumbar pelvic control, probably the hip, the anatomy of the hips will make single leg landing a little bit harder for female athletes, and a little bit with more compensation. So it's all about hammering the basics for me. It's just like ACL programs. For me, it's ACL program is good movement. It's good motor control. It's slowing them down in the weight room in specific ways. Not every time that you're going to slow them down. If you're doing power, you can't slow them down. But exercise, single leg exercise that can really bring that awareness. And I always tell them like, okay, you need to hold the bottom position, the start and finish position for 3 seconds, so they can start, getting them and recruiting different ways to kind of get the stability. So, and I think stuff that I've been realizing from my assessment, especially with players coming from college, is they're strong, they're powerful, but a lot of colleges still, I think, lack the programming for like single leg, the rotational power, the single leg stability, the slowing down, because they can go and go, but if you tell them to hold for 2 seconds, they can't. So that, I think that movement quality needs to be a little bit more of a priority in the college environment. And again, like, there's some colleges and universities that are killing it, like you guys, like at Wake Forest. Like, it's amazing what you guys do there, and the competency of like all the coaches there. But I think there's some schools that still needs to get a little bit more that movement quality, and I think there's still some schools that have that football mentality where most of the time the director is a football coach, and
I think too many times as well, I think strength coaches, which I don't necessarily love that term, are too comfortable being in the weight room and not necessarily coming out of the weight room, and that's the most important part. I spend my mornings kind of in the weight room for the most part, and my afternoons on the court, and I think it's really important for your athletes to see you in their environment. You've got to go to their environment. You've got to coach in their environment. Luckily I can play tennis. Like, if they see me playing tennis, that obviously helps them understand. Oh, maybe Chris actually understands a little bit more about tennis. He can play. He knows. Like, when the girls team first saw me like playing tennis, they were like, "Oh wow, like, you can play." And I think even if it's just going to kick a ball around or throw a ball or whatever it's going to be, being in their environment, taking the warm up like on the court, on the field, teaching them movement. And I think that's too many times, like strength coaches are just literally that, like strength. It's like we can make someone super strong. It's like you said, it's that kind of football mentality, which has got its pros, but there's definitely its cons there as well. And we've got to almost get away from that and understand the movement side of it a little bit more. The more you can get out of the weight room and have more of an impact on the field, on the court, which is where the real kind of changes are made, I suppose. I think the better off you'll be.
And understand the demands of the game, like we just talked about. Like if you're in the room, then sometimes you're dealing with all those different sports. Like you have, I think the college system, it's hard too, because the way it is, it's like you have the strength coach. A performance coach is not a thing until now. Like when I was a player, it was just like strength coach. It's not performance, somebody that's doing the warm up, the movement skills on the field. And I think when you talk about elite performance environment, you need to have a constant communication between a strength coach, a technical coach, the athletic department, athletic trainers, and medical department every week, because the strength coach doesn't know what's going on in the field. So if you have those players that just coming off the field from a training session, going straight to the gym, and you don't know exactly what the focus of the session was, you can like you cannot be effective when you're coaching, because they might be freaking fatigued from a small side games, playing small side and neuromuscular load, and then you put more neuromuscular load on top of it. Then are you getting the adaptations that you need, at the fatigue level? So at the same time, if you have an injured player, they're coming out, their return, they're clear to play. And the clear to play when I play was like, AT said, you're okay, you go back to the field right away. Is there a return to play protocol in place? Most of the time, no. As when it's ACL, there was, because you have to go non-contact to a contact. But the other injuries, like if you stay a week without training and you just go and back to training, the loads are like, and then you get re-injured, and people don't understand why you don't get re-injured. So it's that communication, which I learned a lot when I was at the college system and I was a sports performance coach. And it was a little weird because I was a performance coach, but I couldn't go to the weight room and do the weight room part because there's a strength coach there. But then there's no communication between anybody. So I started doing those weekly meetings with the ATs and with the technical staff, where we're all on the same page. Okay, this player needs more work on this. When you go to the weight room, please prioritize this with them. My players are going to focus a lot of things in the field on this. Make sure you complement or you supplement in the weight room so you're not overloading a system and stuff like that. So I think the college system needs a lot of improvements in that aspect. And you see a lot of professional teams that still lack that. So I'm not going to blame the college system.
It'll eventually kind of find its way through. And I think one of the big things is, I think that the communication is slowly starting to improve between like S&C, ATC, that type of stuff, and sports coach. Those kind of smaller interdisciplinary teams are slowly coming together and merging as people realize that it is important. I think a lot of it comes down to the sports coach as well, understanding actually what is, and soccer's probably better at this than I'd say 90% of other sports in terms of tactical periodization. I know it was kind of Jose Mourinho was one that kind of brought it to life for a lot of people. But I think if a tennis coach, a softball coach, like whatever it is, if they can understand tactical periodization, and this is something I've worked on with my coaches, I presented to them at the start of the year, okay, this is what weekly microcycle looks like if we're going to peak for a Saturday game or play on a Saturday, or if we're playing twice a week, this is what it should look like. And it's trying to break down the barriers and have those conversations, and then understand what are the demands. Like you said, you need to know exactly what's happening on the field before they come to your session in the weight room. And it's understanding what a certain drill. So if we do a 2-cross-1 line drill in tennis, which no one will really know what that is, but essentially you hit 2 balls cross and then the one person switches it down the line. There's a lot of running, a lot of movement. Now we do 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off for 4 sets. And now I know what type of heart rate response that's going to give the players and things like that, how much fatigue that's going to cause. So if that drill is in the session before my weight room session, I know, all right, they're probably not going to be too fresh by the time they come to me.
Exactly.
compared to it being maybe a more technical, tactical session, then you can maybe do some more power orientated things. And I think having those open lines of conversation is obviously very important in developing the athlete. So
Yeah.
all right,
I
Ivi,
think you're. I
go on,
think
sorry.
I'm gonna mention that because I watched your presentation at the conference at Wake Forest, and it was just amazing what you're doing there with the tennis team, and how can you really be interacting with the technical staff and using that periodization, which is so important. I think other coaches definitely should listen to your presentation or listen to your work, because you're doing really good stuff there. So keep it up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I know we're getting on a little bit here. I don't want to take too much of your time. So just to finish off, I've got 2 questions for you. First up, what advice would you give to a young S&C coach trying to get into the profession? And then secondly, are there any books or articles or anything that you would suggest reading, maybe something you've read recently that really sticks out that you think coaches would, during this time of where they don't have much going on, they should really get into?
Yeah, so I think the biggest advice I would say, and I always say that, it's you always have to have a roadmap, and always have to, as a young coach, you really need to know where you're at right now and where you want to be. And there's a road where you're at and where you want to be, your long-term goal and what your dream, you know. We need to understand that a road is bumpy, and it's going to be crazy. It's going to be weird sometimes. It's not going to be the way we envision, like I'm talking about coronavirus. Like, have we envisioned that? No. Like, that's changing a lot of things in our profession too, because we never dealt with not having an intern work with, like, to peak and stuff like that. So understanding that road is going to be hard, and there's going to be adversities, but that's the only way you're going to learn and continue to get to where you want to be. I think a lot of young coaches, sometimes they're pretty they're just worried to get that high professional right away, the role, the fancy role, the sexy role, and they forget to do a good job in where they are right now. And I think was really huge for me, especially when I was at Bowling Green as a sports performance coach. How can you be the best of the best there, like, and where you are, instead of just fantasizing, like just creating that dream and just, oh, I want to be there, I want to be there, I want to be there. How can you ask questions, get mentors around you to really help you throughout the way? Make mistakes, because that's part of it. We have a lot of. I was really perfectionist. I was the type of coach that I hated to make mistakes. But then I realized, well, if I don't make mistakes, then I'm not actually learning anything practical or whatever. So making mistakes is huge, and it's part of the process. And being able to do well where you're at, it's gonna lead to good things. And I think people forget about that. If I believe that your universe is going to help you if you're kicking, like, you're doing everything that you can to be the best. Are you asking questions? Are you're just thinking, oh, I'm good enough, like I know everything? Then you're not going to get anywhere, because you need to be constantly learning, constantly asking questions, constantly looking at videos and saying, this is not right. Where is this coming from? And then getting those pieces of the puzzle together. So that way you surround yourself with good people, with good mentors that are going to help you along the way to answer those questions. I have probably 5 or 6 mentors that I speak almost every week, because I want to ask questions, and for them it's good too, because they see other perspectives and stuff like that. So don't be afraid to make those connections and keep those connections alive, and I think that's huge. And things are always going to work out at the end if you do that. And then the books, I think I'm going to say, well, Callister is a big mentor, and he's my brother. I'm always going to say his stuff has helped me to get to where I'm at in terms of my philosophy and stuff like that. So how to become a supple leopard. Not only that, but his virtual mobility coach app has so much good stuff. And his 14-day hip mobility challenge, like if you want to help your athletes, send them those videos, that's so helpful. I think back to the basics and the classic book of periodization for team sports from Bompa have really helped me out to in the weight room. And then the other one is sports performance for team sports. Oh, what's the name of it? I have it right here in my bookshelf. 1 second. It's high performance training for sports. Which is really good. I always go back to it. Really good resource that, I always get back to it. The high intensity interval training book, specifically for soccer, has helped me a lot with Martin Bescheid. I don't know how I say his last name, but that one really helped me. And then Sue Falsone is a physical therapist. She was a physical therapist from Mexico. She wrote this book. It was Bridging the Gap from Rehab to Performance, which was amazing. So it's kind of like literally bridging that gap and understanding the rehab and that road to performance. It has to have a road return to play protocol in place, and kind of understanding the different variables there. So those are, I think, definitely the biggest ones that kind of guided me through it, and I still get back to it.
I've definitely made a few notes there, a few books that I'm going to have to get onto Amazon and make a few orders.
Yes, definitely. Highly encourage those.
Yeah, some great suggestions, and I think your first point there as well, especially where it's essentially make the big time where you're at. Don't get too far ahead of yourself. Do the best job where you are. Then, if you're waiting on that big time offer, so to speak, like it'll come eventually if you do the right things at the right time.
Right.
So
exactly.
I think there's some huge take-home points from this episode. Ivi, I really appreciate your time, and I can't wait to listen to it back and watch it back myself, especially with some of the movement stuff that we talked about earlier in the episode. So thank you very much for your time. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you for inviting me to this, Chris.
No worries. See you next time.
All right. See you.